Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Genre Equalities Behold podcast. I'm Hitzer.
I'm Isa.
This week we're talking about three brand new topics. Our main topic is a really radical satire of African American culture that began as a comic strip and then was adapted into a quite beloved television adult swim cartoon. It's called The Boondocks by Aaron McGruder, one of my favorite cartoons of all time.
Hmm.
Um, After that, we'll be discussing Netflix's Unbelievable, one of the best miniseries from last year, starring Caitlin Dever, Tony Collette, and Merritt Weaver. Very sensitive and humane sexual assault drama, which, unlike a lot of other kind of rape narratives, focus on the victims
Yeah.
rather than the focus on the detectives or on the perpetrator, which is very fresh, very unusual, and the kind of narrative that we need like, in modern times. Finally, we'll be talking about a really unique anime about commerce and about economics. A very dense anime about such things set in a medieval fantasy world of spirits and creatures such as that. But really, it focuses on money, which is very interesting. Me not being an economics major or not knowing a lot about economic theory, I have a lot that I've learned via the show and via the Wikipedia-ing I've been doing, while watching the show. So I would like to share that with Isa as well after this.
Sweet. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean Isa is the one who recommended it to me, so very interesting, one of the more interesting enemies I've ever seen.
Yeah, I just wanted to recommend something kind of out of the usual kind of anime stuff that we get, right? Like anime as a medium in general has always leaned towards like experimental and very philosophical, you know, um, um things, right? Like challenging things in that manner. So when you get something like Spice and Wolf, right, that takes
Hmm.
something that is to most people incredibly like boring or like not just uninteresting in that manner and to phrase it through that medium to tell
Yep.
its own story. I always think it's good to recommend.
Oh yeah, definitely. Excited to talk about that as I am with our main topic this week. The Boondocks was, in my opinion, one of the most blunt and straightforward critiques of American culture, and specifically African American culture featured on television.
Yeah.
The show was an animated adaptation of Aaron McGruder's long-running comic strip, which featured in several newspapers, syndicated in newspapers throughout America and all around the world. It followed two young boys named Huey and Riley Freeman, two Chicago kids
Hmm.
growing up with their grandfather in the predominantly white and affluent neighborhood of Woodcrest. It is an incredible show, very provocative, steeped in controversy, and very divisive, I would say, amongst the mainstream or casual audiences, just because it pulls no punches, and it is very it, it it's so provocative in the way that South Park is provocative,
Yeah.
but in a very different context.
Yeah.
What do you think about the Boondocks, Isa?
um I only recently revisited it, right? Just because we're gonna do this episode, and
Yep.
like rewatching some of the stuff, because I feel like it was a lot more difficult back then to get a hold of Adult Swim stuff, right? Or at least
Mm.
where how old we were at the time and where we are.
Yep. Yep.
So being able to revisit the majority of the franchise,
Hmm.
coming back to that, I realized that I only had watched a lot of it in bits and pieces. And a lot of them tended to be the more popular episodes that eventually became their own kind of memes and stuff like that, as far as
Yeah.
memeing existed back then.
Hmm.
So I really enjoyed the fact that I got to kind of see the overall arcs, right, that they were trying to the characters get across all the episodes. Because by and large, right, with the exception of certain episodes that are reflexive and have inside jokes and all of that, like it is rather standalone.
Hmm.
As far as it's possible. I remember it being, I mean, it's extremely funny and extremely kind of poignant in the way that they talk about, black culture and black
Yeah.
stereotypes and all of that. Sometimes to a ridiculous degree. It
Hmm.
is. sharp, right? The wit is incredibly sharp. The observations are incredibly sharp.
Mm-hmm.
But it's told in to us in a way that like it doesn't take itself too seriously. But you're completely right to say that it's like not close to what we would get out of South Park, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or anything of that ilk. Uh, just on the whole, I really really enjoyed just like watching through everything again. And I think the context of watching it today, right, is feels vastly different. I think there are a
Mm-hmm.
couple of episodes I think which we'll dive into a bit later that have more potent messages today, I
Mm-hmm.
feel, than it might have at the time, right? Like it sort of was some of the episodes, like the Martin Luther King one, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
I felt like was kind of ahead of its time, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
in the wake of everything that's happened this year
Yeah.
as well, and like it is a testament to just how good the writing is. I feel whenever we have a series that kind of makes this sort of timeless statements, right? We get
Mm-hmm.
it sometimes with The Simpsons, we get it sometimes with Rick and Morty and things like that, and all things that we rave about. But the Boondocks is up there for sure,
Yeah, and to our point, South Park as well,
and South
like
Park,
in,
yeah.
in a very different way, but yeah, like both were like all of these shows were kind of like polemic, divisive.
Hmm.
The especially timeless episodes that were criticized at the time for being too provocative or being too negative or being too critical of certain aspects of American culture,
Yep,
have proven, without a shadow of a doubt, to be true.
yep.
Time was on their side because
Hmm.
they were speaking truth, like I think Aaron McGruder kind of really reveled in criticizing and intellectually destroying politics, race relations,
Yep,
public figures, and popular culture, but particularly Black popular culture at that time.
yep,
It was brutally funny. Like it just pulled no punches, brutally funny.
yeah.
And it's a caustic series that frequently spoke truth to power, and pointed out some of Black society's most toxic ills.
Hmm.
And I would like to point out also the difference between the Boondocks, being a Black show.
Yep.
By the way, Huey and Riley are voiced by recent Emmy winner Regina King, who just won for Watchmen.
Yeah, so
Congrats.
so good. Yep.
But like other shows, like let's say Dear White People, for
Hmm.
example, right? The critique is on white people, and the which is valid and fair, of
Yes.
course. But the Boondocks does something different in that its critique is inwards. How
Uh-huh.
can Black identity and Black culture be improved upon? What are the toxic nature, or what's the toxicities of various Black identities? So it relies a lot on compelling caricatures of various Black identities to create a worthwhile dialogue about taboo topics such as
Hmm.
cultural appropriation, gentrification, and race relations, as I mentioned. Like
Yep.
Huey, for example, who is like a disciple of the Black Panthers. Is kind of the show's protagonist and the cynical voice of reason and the moral compass of the family trio. He's labeled a domestic terrorist for his militant brand of Black nationalist politics.
Hmm.
Adamant about wanting to better his people and his desire to strive for something greater. But at the same time, Huey himself is a caricature of the overly politicized Black man who complains, and is politically active in terms of words.
Yep.
But when it comes down to it, Huey doesn't really do anything.
Yeah.
He is not constructive. He's critical. On the flip side, you have Riley, the impressionable 8-year-old gangster wannabe who kind of represents the negative impact that certain stereotypes and imagery can have on urban Black youth. Like he idolizes the toxic masculinity and gender norms of, I guess, the quote unquote thug life. Like his gangster rap heroes. And his obsession with mimicking what he sees on TV and in music leads him to blindly follow unsavory rappers like Thugnificent and
Delicious.
Gangsterlicious
Yeah.
and Ed Wonkler the Third. And all of these characters themselves are caricatures too.
Yeah.
Um, it's brilliant. Like I think Uncle Ruckus is probably the show's
Oh my god.
most firebrand depiction of an Uncle Tom, shall we say? A
Yeah.
man who is a black man who is a white supremacist who believes that Caucasians are of a higher stature, of a higher class,
Hmm.
and frequently denigrates his own people. He claims he has revitiligo, which is the opposite of what Michael Jackson has. Michael Jackson claims he has vitiligo, which makes his skin fairer. He has revitiligo, so therefore he is a white man who is absurdly dark because it's reverse vitiligo. It's pretty hilarious,
Yeah. Yeah.
and all of the characters are really really funny. What stands out to you in terms of the caricatures presented in the Boondocks?
I mean, like, definitely. Okay, so Huey and Riley are kind of like their own. The dynamic between Huey and Riley, right, and just how different their philosophies on life are and their personalities are, is a joy to kind of watch.
Mm.
It's often very easy to forget that they're just kids,
Yep.
kind of like making their way through a pretty fucked up world, right? As far as the where the franchise is placed. Uh, yeah, like it's. I think Uncle Ruckus sticks out the most to me, just because they've used that sort of like self-hating black man, um, not stereotype, but like caricature to such great effect,
Yeah,
right?
and also like I feel bad for laughing at everything he says, but it's so wildly inappropriate that I
It
can't help but
Yeah,
laugh.
it is so. I mean, like I think as when he first appears, right? Like I think he first appears as a security guard at the garden
Yeah,
party, right? I kind of forgot about him, as a character, and like for him to say those things, I was just like, what the hell? Really? Are you
yeah,
serious? Like, and then it just gets more and more ridiculous to the point, and I think it culminates in the point where he basically starts his own church, right? He
yeah,
goes to White Heaven,
yeah.
which is one of my favorite episodes because then like everything there makes sense, right? Like it makes so much sense in the context of him being given sort of like this mandate from a white savior,
Hmm.
from white Jesus. And it is the fact that they can use that to such great effect at some times and make you just extremely uncomfortable in the most mundane of situations at other times,
Yep.
just as like such a well used caricature, right?
Hmm.
As opposed to, oh, I forgot, like what's the guy who owns basically everything, your white corporate.
Right. Yeah, basically like Trump before Trump, like
Yeah, so Wansler, right? Like Mr.
once.
Wansler, and
Yeah,
the whole lemonade episode as well
with Jasmine. Yeah,
with Jasmine, like
yeah,
perfect use of
yeah,
caricature there, right? Or
yeah.
even the ITIS episode, for
Hmm.
example, like great, but like that didn't see as good a use as Uncle Ruckus,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Like they saw that character to its logical conclusion and then some, but always hit home the point.
Hmm.
And I think that's tough to do, right? I mean, if you want to make a comparison, it's kind of like South Park, right? Any sort of the characters there never hit that kind of tone, right? Like they never hit that kind of note
Hmm.
throughout all the years that they've done that. Sure, they serve a purpose and they try and make a point, a meta point, so to say, but like nothing quite as effective, I feel, as Uncle Ruckus' character.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Um,
What do you think about their criticisms of? I don't know whether you've ever gotten to that part, like the Obama administration era of the Boondocks, where they criticized Obama because basically there was this feeling of hope among the black community
yeah.
with Obama being elected in. The Boondocks dedicated several episodes to just Obama's failure of living up to that hope, of living up to what they wanted him to be.
I feel like it. Those would definitely. I mean, we can say this in hindsight now,
Yeah.
right? For sure. They were definitely. I mean, it was pretty on the dot, right? Like you can't take away from the fact they had very valid points about his failures and things like that. But at the same time, I keep thinking back when I was watching the Obama episodes to the Martin Luther King episode, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And comparing those two and just like how the culture in itself and the expectations of the people are 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 continually evolving and changing based upon a variety of stuff going
Hmm.
on. And maybe you should just fill in people a bit about what the Martin Luther King Jr. episode's about.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So essentially, Martin Luther King Jr., instead of dying after the assassination attempt on his life, goes into a coma, and he wakes up in the
Mm.
time that the
In the in
Boondocks
the,
takes place,
in
right?
the mid 2000s, yeah.
Yeah, in the mid 2000s, and he finds himself as a man out of time, quite literally,
Mm.
as a man who has no idea, um, what the world looks like right now, and despite of all the good things, right, that he has managed to accomplish with his life before his coma or before his death in IRL,
Mm-hmm.
um, like he finds himself very very out of place, not just in the world, but specifically in the black world, right? Like
Mm.
the culture has changed a great deal, the belief system has changed a great deal, and while his name for the longest time has been heralded on many people's lips as just kind of like a paragon or paradigm to live
Mm.
up to, he finds himself discredited and kind of out of place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it draws a very interesting parallel with the Obama episodes, whereby again, right, you have someone who's held to that, coming of a new savior, and like these grand expectations and all of that. But at the end of the day, it really boils down to the fact that they are human, right, and they are men, and they have failings in that particular manner. The expectations, while
Mm.
hopeful and grand and all of that, right, are difficult to live up to, and ultimately, like, it is more than just the burden of one man to carry all of that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. One of the best episodes of the Boondocks was the Martin Luther King Jr. episodes, and they have had a lot of, I guess, iconic slash meme worthy episodes. Maybe if you don't watch the Boondocks, you would have noticed certain memes that popped up here and there whenever a Boondocks episode, much like The Simpsons, proves to be prescient.
Yeah.
Um, for example, I think the most famous Boondocks episode only happened in the season one, episode two. It was about the trial of R. Kelly,
Oh yeah.
and it was just so brutally funny. It was so uh, it was a thing that this happened what almost 20 years ago, right? Like
Yep.
in the mid 2015 to
Hmm.
18 years ago, Huey and Aaron McGruder, by extension, was the only person who saw uh, what what was happening with R. Kelly, lah. It's in 2002 he stood trial under the allegations of pedophilia. He had sex and urinated on an underage girl. The animated mock trial at actually years before Kelly's actual trial of child pornography charges.
Yep.
It discussed everything from the sexual proclivities of the ancient Greeks to what constitutes a mountain of evidence, and culminated in a scorching confrontation between the parties involved.
Yep.
Riley, an R. Kelly superfan, he kind of defends the accused, insisting that the girl was old enough to consciously get out of the way of the P stream.
Yeah.
Huey, on the other hand, believes that the artist should be held accountable for his actions and delivers this impassioned speech.
Yep.
Every famous N word that gets arrested is not Nelson Mandela. Yes, the government conspires to put a lot of innocent black men in jail on fallacious charges, but
Yep.
R. Kelly is not one of those men.
Yep.
And that speech has been, posted around, like, especially in more recent years when R. Kelly is finally being held accountable for these things, and
Yep.
that's nearly 2 decades later.
Yep.
And much like in real life, when R. Kelly's trial actually happened, those in attendance ultimately fail to heed Huey's words.
Hmm.
Riley starts booing, and the onlookers go right back around to dancing around. They play boombox playing R. Kelly's hits.
Yep.
The Pied Piper himself, R. Kelly, is released as an innocent man. It has echoes of the O.J. Simpson trial, and then of course of R. Kelly's trial as well, and it has stood the test of time because only 18 to 20 years later does the black community fully understand that R. Kelly is not a good person, and
Yep.
it should not be idolized.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think like Huey's line about like if you really care about R. Kelly, right, you get him counseling, right, and rehabilitate him or something along that lines. I can't remember the exact line. But I mean, like in its time when it came out, that would have been extremely powerful for someone to have heard that and paid attention to that.
Nobody did,
But
apparently.
nobody did, and he finds himself where he is today, and we find ourselves in just kind of like the circus it's been, right?
The
Yeah,
prescience of the episode, incredible.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I think like that's just one of the many kind of like moments in time, or even like entire episodes which really spoke to the moment back then
Mm-hmm.
and are just prescient in like unbelievable ways. Yeah.
Definitely, one of our favorite moments is happens in season one and has kind of been replayed as a recurring joke. It is the N-word moment. Like, if you know what I'm talking about, it speaks. It's basically an episode breaking down why black men can lose rationality in certain instances.
Yeah.
It's obviously played for laughs, but as with all good comedy, there is that element of truth in it.
Hmm.
And that Aaron McGruder likes to poke at. Certain aspects of black culture and black society that he doesn't agree with,
Yeah.
and he feels that they could improve upon. It is not demeaning black culture. In fact, every single character on the Boondocks, each presents a different aspect of black culture, and each frequently gets into arguments with one another, right?
Yeah.
And it's not didactic in a way that, like, let's say the West Wing is. Like, it doesn't say this point of view is wrong or that point of view is wrong. It's just allowing you to kind of see the faults for what they are, and you make your own judgment.
Hmm.
One of his most an episode that was actually banned from Adult Swim, that wasn't allowed to air because the parent company Viacom, that
Yeah.
owns Cartoon Network and Adult Swim, also owns BET. Um, and uh, Boondocks frequently makes fun of BET's programming, like Black Entertainment Television, about how it is detrimental to the self image and to the culture of black society. With its endless reality shows about gangster rappers and soap operas, and things like that. Like, it kind of dramatizes and glorifies some of the worst aspects of black culture,
Hmm.
things that shouldn't be glorified or idolized.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Mm.
Uh, Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then I'm just thinking about Exhibit and the Pimp My Ride episode.
that was really Exhibit, by the way. He was on
Yeah,
the show. Yeah.
yeah, it was ridiculously funny. I really enjoyed that episode. But like in kind of lieu with that, right? The whole idea of taking a shot at BET or even at rap culture.
Yeah.
With yeah, I mean, like what great names, like what great monikers they have, like
Like,
Gangstalicious and Thugnificent.
magnificent.
Thugnificent
Yeah.
in particular. That episode is one of my favorite.
Hmm.
Just talking about like gentrification and all of that, and
And also
how.
like the fake posturing of black rappers, like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which ties into the snitching episode as well.
Correct. Yeah.
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 So, I mean, like, just so many good looks, right?
Hmm.
At so incisive that it's really hard to kind of shake at how brilliant this series is. And I don't think when I first watched the material, like how I didn't realize how how good it was. Like, it was enjoyable. It was funny. It is still ridiculously funny, but like just how sharp it is, right? Like, and that constantly kind of blows me away, like in the midst of like holding my sides and laughing about some of the most ridiculous things that they can come up with.
Hmm.
There is so much truth in that, and that in and of itself is so powerful.
Oh yeah, I mean, 100%, man. Like, any other things about the Boondocks stick out to you?
Okay, so definitely the music's dope, right? And there's like interestingly enough, like the whole look and feel and even the music is
Anime style,
it's
right?
anime style, right? Like
Yeah.
Magruder is a big anime and manga fan, right? Like, he talks
Hmm.
about Cowboy Bebop very fondly. He talks about how Samurai Champloo has kind
Hmm.
of like influenced and style. The opening sequence looks a lot like Samurai Champloo, right? And
Hmm.
the fight scenes are very anime like as well. Apparently, I read up that Madhouse, like the anime studio Madhouse, was supposed to help out, but the deal
Mm.
fell through, right?
Ah.
And in the end, it went out with a equally kind of like prestigious South Korean studio, MOI Animation, who handled
Hmm.
the thing for that. What's interesting is just like I think especially like my brother popped in while I was watching the show, and he was just like, "Oh, does that have anything to do with Afro Samurai, right? Because Huey does have a samurai sword in a couple of the episodes, and he's just kind of swinging around." I said, "Like, yeah, it's all kind of like cut from the same cloth, you know." Uh, and I mean, like, obviously, I watch a ton of anime, and for to have that kind of tribute to that in the way and the form that it has taken in the Boondocks is just like it makes me really happy.
Yes, it also speaks a lot to how a lot of black youths, especially growing up in the 80s, 90s, and
Yep.
early 2000s, were influenced by Asian culture.
Mm.
Kung fu movies, Japanese anime, were big parts of the kind of, weirdly enough, the kind of black identity, and what they drove to. Like,
Mhm.
look at bands like Wu Tang Clan, or, well, not bands, rap crew like Wu Tang Clan, for example. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this is just a fantastic show with so many layers to it. But I mean, it's important to remember also that it's extremely funny.
Yeah.
Like, it's, you can be offended. I'm sure a lot of people out there watching this will be offended at one point or another throughout the show,
Yeah.
because if you aren't, right, then the show is not doing
Do its
something
job.
right, lah.
Hmm.
Correct, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But the way it comments on like black culture from a critical black perspective, that pinpoints the complexity of the black experience. It's a politically charged punch, and a sharp racial awareness that drives a dagger through the heart of the notion that black culture is monolithic. It's not monolithic. There's a lot of variations and aspects to it,
Yeah.
and occasionally is interrupted by, as you're saying, like well choreographed and strikingly violent anime style action sequences. A lot of cool hip hop music, vulgar, irreverent humor, liberal use of the N word. I think, viewing it today, despite the fact that the Boondocks has been proven to be prescient and true,
Yeah.
viewing it today would actually be more uncomfortable than viewing it in the lens of the early 2000s.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because I mean, early 2000s was kind of like the era where there were these comedies that were pushing the edge, trying to push the envelope, trying to be as offensive as possible, while making larger points about why is this offensive, why do you think it's offensive, what are the issues really here, like,
Yep.
I think shows like South Park, as you mentioned, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, push the edge with that, in terms of, I guess, white culture and white politics, and on the flip side of that, in America, in terms of black culture and black politics, there was the Boondocks.
Hmm. Hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I highly recommend.
Hmm.
Just because like it means something very different in our time, right? And
Hmm.
it is still equally good, if not even better than I think it was once was.
Definitely, if you weren't aware, Aaron McGruder only ran the Boondocks for 3 seasons.
Hmm.
Prior to season 4, he fell out with Adult Swim and Cartoon Network about money, about basically, his but budgetary issues, shall we say,
Yeah.
and also Adult Swim had issues with the way Aaron McGruder was, handling certain things, like conflicts with sister companies like BET and things like that.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of butting of heads about controversy. So Aaron McGruder left the show in very bad terms, in inauspicious terms. Much like the way that Chappelle left the Chappelle show. Like, no
Hmm.
amount of money could bring him back if he wasn't allowed to Uh, cultivate his creative freedoms, his creative direction, which is why season 4 of the show, if you do watch it, is not recommended. Season 4 of the show
Yeah.
feels like a very lazy caricature, a caricature of a caricature.
Hmm.
It is it is the Boondocks. It has the same voice. It kind of talks about black culture, but it just doesn't have the same satirical precision that Aaron McGruder has. So
Yeah.
if you were to watch the Boondocks, I would recommend that you only watch the first 3 seasons and skip the fourth season, which Aaron McGruder was not involved in at all.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Who was it that took over? I was reading about it. Angela Whistle. Right.
Mm.
Yeah. Season 4. Yeah, it's not. It's very interesting, right? That while we're talking about it, that the movie was actually done in widescreen,
Yeah.
right? For all of the episodes, and then it was later cropped to the 43 aspect ratio, and yet another way in which like it was like present. It was before its time,
Hmm.
before widescreen adoption was just like more commonplace. So you
Hmm.
only get to that. I don't know. It's just something about the 4:3 aspect ratio that makes me feel very old.
Hmm.
Because once upon a time we used to consume that, but the whole of season 3 is in widescreen.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Indeed, like, it was just like due to how television shows were presented at the time. Like, everything was 4:3.
yeah.
That's why it was 4:3. But I guess if you bought the DVD copies of it, the unedited, uncut DVD copies of it, the Blu-rays, it is presented in widescreen. So if you have
Hmm.
money, maybe plumb down for that one. Also, HBO Max is in the process of rebooting the Boondocks for a modern adaptation. Aaron
Interesting.
Aaron McGruder is back. He's the one who actually pitched the show to HBO Max.
Mhm.
They signed on. It was supposed to premiere late this year, around this time. Unfortunately, of course, as with all other productions, COVID-19 has stalled it for a bit. So it's been postponed to 2021. But
Yeah.
I think the Boondocks in this era would be very interesting to watch.
Yeah. Do you feel like it will be a very different show?
Not necessarily. I mean, it has always been provocative and sharp, and I don't see any reason why it would cease to be.
Hmm.
Just because they have more topics to talk about. Like
Yeah.
what would Huey have to say about ICE detaining children at the border?
Yeah.
How would Riley react to 21 Savage being a British citizen? Things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. It is it meant to be a remake or a sequel or like
It's not a sequel. They kind of have a Simpsons-esque policy where they don't age, they don't grow.
right.
Just the world around them changes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That should be pretty interesting. Hopefully that comes out soon.
Yeah, definitely. Like I can't wait to see what they would do with Megan Thee Stallion, things like that, or what they would do with Takeshi 69, being a snitch, or what they could do with Colin Kaepernick, or what they could do with Jussie Smollett. Oh my God, Jussie Smollett! That
Yeah.
episode is gonna be fire, man. So yes, we're definitely looking forward to the HBO Max reboot of the Boondocks, and if you haven't, please go check out Adult Swim's The Boondocks, the original Boondocks, now available on Blu-ray, DVD, as well on Adult Swim's streaming service. As we mentioned, go only watch the first 3 seasons. The fourth season isn't worth your time. I think you would definitely love it if you love shows like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia
Hmm.
or South Park. But be warned, like you may be offended, and I think you should be offended
Hmm.
in certain cases. But I think that's the beauty of the show, lah. The provocative nature of the show, but also the intellectual nature of the show, where it's not just shouting and cursing and being provocative for the sake of being provocative. There's a point to all of it,
Yep.
and that's where the Boondocks excels, lah. Anyways, let's move on to the second part of our podcast where we exchange recommendations. First up, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite crime dramas of 2019, Unbelievable. It is an 8-part Netflix miniseries. It's a remarkable study of how sexual assault investigations should be conducted and how they shouldn't be conducted.
Hmm.
Um, it's for one thing, Unbelievable is actually based on a true story. It was based on a story that was reported in 2015 by ProPublica and the Marshall Project. Um, it kind of folds two narratives from these two separate articles that kind of focus on the same case
Hmm.
in 8 episodes. One kind of might feel bleakly familiar and kind of dumbfoundingly and raging at the same time. It's about what happens when people investigating a rape do almost everything wrong.
Yeah.
Not the procedural elements, although they mess those up too. The human elements, the part where a detective questions an 18-year-old woman who's just survived the worst experience of her life, a woman he's supposed to help and he fails her. In fact, more than failing her, he re-victimizes her, making her go over the story of her attack again and again. Then you have a nurse who pokes and prods at her without asking whether she needs to take a break, a foster mother who raises suspicions that she's
Hmm.
lying. No one pays attention to the woman's emotional state or how it might be limiting her ability to efficiently convey what happened to her.
Yeah.
But then also the other story, the one that you rarely hear about, the one that's all the more poignant for how strange it seems. Same thing, a woman is raped, but this time a different detective, a female detective, investigating the case, does everything right.
Hmm.
She takes the woman to a private space after making sure she's comfortable. She tells her over and over again that whatever the woman is feeling or feels like doing or saying in that moment is absolutely okay. The detective is gentle. She's professional. She reassures the woman uh, that the nurses about to examine her are well trained and sensitive.
Yeah.
She helps the officers preserve valuable evidence, quietly, ruthlessly. Unbelievable kind of probes the discrepancies between the two ways rape victims are treated. The series asks you to imagine what if every person who's been assaulted were treated this way. Here comes the help that you really need. Here comes the belief that you really need. Um, And the thing that makes it all the sadder is that the main character at the center of the show, played by Caitlin Dever, who you might recognize from Booksmart, which we reviewed earlier this year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Fantastic performance, by the way, one of the best performances for last year. Incredible. As are Tony Collette and Merritt Weaver, who played the two detectives investigating her case, and several related cases. It's so sad because the character Marie is based on a true story. Obviously, the real person's name is not Marie. It has been hidden for confidentiality purposes,
Mm-hmm.
for obvious reasons, of course. But Marie's story is true, and that's what makes it all the more sad, frightening, infuriating, and all of those, and unbelievable. Really takes a sensitive and humane approach to the rape narrative, which has
Yeah.
kind of been overused recently, sometimes for titillation, sometimes just to spark anger, sometimes as a plot device. Most of the times, you focus on the detectives on Law and Order trying to figure it out, or you focus on, so many true crime documentaries or docudramas focus on the perpetrator,
Mm-hmm.
the heinous serial killer, the heinous serial rapist. Why do they do the things they do? Let's uncover the darkness behind them. But so rarely and so infrequently do
Mm-hmm.
you focus on the victim. How does the victim cope? What does the victim feel? How do they do? And even past the initial trauma of the assault, how can the victim continue to live their lives? And in this rare instance, two female detectives
Yeah.
who have a different, more empathetic approach to the victims are able to do a better job than the male detectives who uh, probably ill-equipped emotionally to understand
Mm-hmm.
where the victim is coming from. And I think these are the aspects that make Unbelievable a special show on Netflix.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. The fact that um the victim stories take
yeah,
center stage, and in addition to that, that women take the forefront in the investigation, in the
mm,
support, in the help provided to the victims. Like, it's an incredibly important thing to see, you know
mm,
when you're portraying a topic like this, right? Like, when you're
yep,
examining a topic like this, just all in all, like, it it's not an easy watch. I think especially the first couple of episodes are tough to watch,
hmm,
especially but even as they go about, sorry, but the difficult things, and it's meant to be difficult, it's meant to be uncomfortable, it's meant to, elicit those kind of feelings, right? Because you need, to empathize and feel what the victims have gone through as well.
yeah,
There, but the on top of that, just like some amazing portrayal of really solid detective and police work,
hmm,
that is like incredibly detailed and incredibly compelling, right? Like,
mm.
you feel their frustrations. I think Tony Collette and oh no,
Merritt Weaver.
yeah, Marie Weaver do an amazing job, just kind of like bouncing off of each other. I think their personalities really stick out, and they clash. Both of them have such strong personalities,
Hmm.
and they are both very passionate about what they do, but their approaches clash sometimes. And I think it's very important the way in which they resolve those things, right? Like, they come from two very different kind of approaches, two very different kind of worldviews, but they are united by a common goal. And the way they go about um, negotiating the spaces that they're in, and just kind of like the roles that they're playing, it
Yeah,
is incredibly, it makes for incredibly compelling TV,
hmm,
right? Without the need to have a lot of the sometimes for crime stuff, right? There's a lot of sensationalism, there's a kind of blow up, there's a lot of like posturing and aggressiveness and all of that. Like,
hmm.
traditionally those are the things that you see, but like, I think Unbelievable just proves that you don't need all those things to make an equally compelling drama.
Right, right. In an era where police dramas are under scrutiny for perpetrating police propaganda,
Yeah.
your Law and Orders and the crime procedurals of all that nature, especially in the wave of Me Too and Black Lives Matter, two particular minorities in America that perhaps don't get the protection from the police that they should.
Hmm.
It kind of this is one of those shows that is both very honest about the deficiencies of the American justice system, and also very honest about the ways that it can work. Also, like, particularly with the detectives assigned to this case, this is how do you do it right, and some of the feeling of investment that you get. Of these, I'm going to call them characters, although I know they're real people.
Yep.
Some of the feeling I get is due to the incredible performances, which are grounded and lived in across the board.
Mm-hmm.
I think Weaver and Colette, in particular, create fully authentic women who ooze integrity and
Yep.
have also enough insecurities and make enough mistakes to seem like actual human beings instead of the stock good cops that you see in TV shows.
Yep.
Caitlin Dever also does beautiful work as the damaged, vulnerable Marie. Honestly, I could watch all three of them act every day, all day, today, tomorrow, Sunday, whatever, and it has great writing,
Yep.
great directing. It does it. It's humanist and low key feminist, and it
Yes.
doesn't and it isn't flashy.
Mm-hmm.
There is no
Mm-hmm.
like flashiness that say like shows that true detective have a stylistic flourish.
Yeah.
Part of it is to not allow you to escape into fantasy or into style,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of grounded style works, and Unbelievable is also brimming with, as you mentioned, a strong sense of detail, but not the type we are accustomed to
Yeah.
in seeing, in typical primetime
Yeah.
procedurals, where there are flashbacks to the rapes, and vivid descriptions of what happened to each woman. The series doesn't get gratuitous.
Nope.
Instead, in fact, most of it is close up on the victims' faces, and it allows the women the same respect that Toni Collette and Merritt Weaver's characters do.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's much more interested in the minutiae involved in serious detective work,
Mm-hmm.
like the late nights spent sifting through hours of traffic camera footage, or the flicker of fear in Marie's eyes, exceptionally performed by Caitlin Dever.
Mm-hmm.
That the detectives interrogating her are too oblivious to see. At the initial detectives, the male detectives.
Yeah.
Um, Unbelievable is a superb example of what show don't tell storytelling
Mm-hmm.
works like.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing, and just the basic premise of the show, where you have this girl who's raped at knife point. Everybody doesn't believe her, hence the title Unbelievable. Really exemplifies why more victims, male and female, do not come forward to the police, because uh, the interrogation techniques, the lack of empathy in that,
Yep.
leads them to be re-victimized through the investigation,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like the wrong way to investigate these particular crimes. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not saying that like all rape victims. I'm not saying that all people who come forward with accusing crimes are telling the truth, but you have to give them the benefit of the doubt in the first place, and
Mm-hmm.
then follow the evidence where it goes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this is what the Unbelievable is so good at making you understand.
Yeah, yeah. There is a very like to the point that you just mentioned. There is a very the scene that stands out where Marie talks exactly about that, right? About the
Mm-hmm.
justice system and about truth being inconvenient. Um, that like kind of hits home the entire point, kind of near the end of the series. But yeah, absolutely agree with you with everything that you've said so far.
Yeah, like Marie's lawyer is one that says nobody ever accuses a robbery victim of lying.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm like I mentioned earlier, like there are cases like Jesse Smollett, for example,
Mm-hmm.
but you, in the beginning we had to give him the benefit of the doubt, lah, and
Mm-hmm.
then you investigated it. But with sexual assault, sometimes the skepticism that the accusers are not telling the truth is kind of hardwired into the system,
Mm-hmm.
and it shouldn't be, and this should be part of criminal justice reform. I mean, unfortunately, this isn't just the case in America. It's this way all around the world.
Yeah.
They tend to be disbelieved, and it's a bit of a societal thing rather than a systemic thing. 'Cause, I mean, the system comes from
Yeah.
society's prejudices, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that's very difficult to fix at a root level.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the way of changing your mindset is by watching shows like this,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Like there is known our criminal justice system can afford to be more human.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, that's what my takeaway is from watching Unbelievable.
Definitely. I mean, definitely agree. Like, this was Toni Collette's, like, I think third or fourth, uh, fucking fantastic performance in a row.
Oh,
Like, from
she can't do anything wrong right now. Like she's killing it.
she killed it in Hereditary.
Hmm.
Then followed it up with this. A lot of great performances along the way. I mean, most recently she was in Charlie Kaufman's latest film. I'm thinking of Ending Things, also on Netflix actually, where
Hmm.
again she delivers a great performance.
Yep, yep.
It's a bit of a Toni Collette Renaissance. Well, Renaissance implies that she ever had a dip, which she never had.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think it is definitely like it's just like a whole slew of great stuff that she's doing right now. You know, or at
Hmm.
least in the last like 2 years or so.
Yeah, I think she's just getting more attention for something she's always done.
I agree.
Similar with Regina King at the moment, like if af- it's a 20-year overnight success.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
you've been
absolutely.
doing great work for 20 years, but just last night people started noticing, so you can't really call them overnight successes or renaissance. They've always been doing this. And Toni Collette is great. Merritt Weaver is great. Kaylee Dever, maybe you can call her an overnight success because she's new. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, like, I would definitely be interested to see what else she'll be doing in the future for sure. Like, her performance is breathtaking.
mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, 100% agree, man. Netflix. It's available on Netflix right now. 8 episodes. Tough watch.
Yeah.
Difficult, challenging. It hurts watching it. It infuriates you watching it, as it should. In the same way that you should be provoked by the Boondocks into questioning your beliefs.
Hmm.
Uh, so does Unbelievable. Unbelievable should provoke you into thinking how you react and how you should empathize with sexual assault victims, like maybe in a different way, maybe be a bit more empathetic, maybe be a bit more believing. uh yeah, I mean, fantastic show. Any concluding thoughts before we move on?
No, I think that's about the sum of it, really.
Definitely, man. Next up we have Spice and Wolf. This is an anime that aired in the mid 2000s, I want to say,
Yeah,
or late
late
2000s maybe.
2000s. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, give us a little synopsis before we jump into this.
Right. Okay. So Spice and Wolf, we basically follow. I always get this wrong. Kraft Lawrence. I always think Lawrence Kraft.
Yeah,
Kraft with a K, like the cheese.
yeah.
Right. Who is he's a merchant. He's like a 20-something-year-old merchant who goes around peddling goods from town to town, much like they did back in a very kind of like fantastical, well, not fantastical, fantasy based
Mm-hmm.
fictional world, a very historical like setting with European influences, right? So thinking like medieval Europe is the best kind of way that I'm going to phrase it. So his goal, his main purpose in life, right, is to gather enough money to start his own shop as a merchant. Like that's kind of his dream. And at the point in time when we meet him, he's been traveling for a good number of years, while gaining experience in trading and so on and so forth. And then one fine night, he stops at a town and he finds in his wagon after a day of business a wolf goddess.
Hmm.
A wolf goddess? Yeah, a wolf goddess called Hollow, who is like more than like what, 6 centuries? 600, she's 600 years old,
Yeah.
right? Except that she takes the form of a 15-year-old girl with wolf's tail and ears as anime does, right? She turns out to be the town's goddess of harvest, and he has kept it blessed and bountiful for many, many years. But her role, right, and just how like the human society has evolved has resulted in increasing isolation and disillusionment, because the townspeople themselves have moved away from her protection and her graces as the goddess of plenty, towards their own methods of increasing their crop yield, right? So
Hmm.
she's heard that they're forgetting her, and the kind of like promises that are made between the farmers and herself, right, in times past. um and because of these changes, she's basically decided, you know what, I'm done with these people. I'm just going to up and leave, and Kraft is going to be the one who's going to bring her back to her homeland,
Yep.
somewhere in the north, right? And since her people have forsaken her, the deal's done and that she's going to go. So that begins the journey of our two kind of protagonists of the story. And they go on to discover how the world has changed, Hollow has been stuck in the same place for a really long time, and they begin a very beautiful, if somewhat complex, relationship with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and while they go through all their kind of adventures, and as the story kind of goes along, we end up learning economics 101, as Hits will tell you shortly.
Oh, definitely, man. Like, what do you think? What? I never supposed, when I was watching an anime that you get, a mix of medieval economics, sprinkle in some character drama, add a lot of snark, and throw in some fantasy elements about wolf gods, and 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 then you get, something like Spice and Wolf, one of the most unique enemies I've ever seen. And for those of you who are still listening after we repeatedly mentioned the word
Economics,
economics,
yeah.
stay tuned. Because I think perhaps the most unique thing about Spice and Wolf is the overall focus on the series lah.
Yeah.
Like some anime will focus largely on action and fight scenes, others on suspense and drama, others on like less substantial things like no, I would say substantial lah, but less dramatic things like fan service or love stories. And Spice and Wolf throws a huge curveball by spending a lot of time on the business of economics and commerce.
Mhm.
This makes the series a bit obtuse at times, esoteric, and the exposition and explanations of medieval economics is usually very well presented.
Mhm.
It can be a bit difficult to understand or comprehend if you never took an interest in economics or never paid attention in economics class, which is me lah.
Yeah.
I am a lot of times when the characters and a lot of the plotting here revolves around economic strategy.
Yeah.
Um, how do you outwit other merchants, etc. And it comes down to economics 101 now. What are the different economic principles that you can use as leverage against one another, things like that. Which led me to viewing Spice and Wolf very differently than how I'd say what I watched Demon Slayer. Like for example, like one of our first episodes, I reviewed Demon Slayer, which was a recommendation by Isa.
Yep.
That one, it was just like straight 10 hours done with it, finish straight away, like binge, bam, done, easy to understand, exciting. With this one, I approached it in a very like how my teachers approach, let's say the first time in Sec 1 when I was reading The Merchant of Venice, for example, right?
Mhm.
Or whatever book you read, like in secondary school or in JC, your teacher would like read one paragraph, and then you don't understand, right? And then you do some research into what the paragraphs mean,
Yeah.
oh, what does this turn of phrase mean, etc. So with every economic principle brought up, in order to fully understand what the plan is, it's a bit like a heist
Yeah.
kind of thing. There are different machinations going on here and there, and I want to understand the various machinations. So I paused maybe every 5 to 10 minutes, every half an episode, basically,
Yeah.
to go on Wikipedia, read up on these principles to really, really kind of get what's going on. And that is not a complaint at all. Like I actually found that to be very invigorating and very intellectually stimulating. It's a
Mhm.
very different way for me to watch a show.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So for the people who are still listening, right? Because
Yeah.
we're assuming people that they heard economics and just like, what is going on? Why am I what? Um, but yeah, for the people who are still listening, like as much as Hits and I are going on about just kind of like the amount of detail that they go into the way things work, right? In medieval economics, which as obscure and esoteric it is, like it doesn't take away from the fact that by and large, Spice and Wolf is an amazing story between two very very different individuals, right? Like with two
Yeah.
very different worldviews. You have basically a demigod who's trying to understand a bit more about the world in which the human world in which she inhabits, and you find and her relationship with her man who is both her caretaker and her guardian, and her patron at the same time, who's trying to make his way in the world, right? And all of the things that happen and the different machinations and strategies that go about with business and trading and mercantileness of the whole mercantileness of it doesn't take away from the fact that there are these great points of action and drama and love and romance,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all interwoven into that, and it's very hard to kind of divorce the two. Like they happen very naturally. It's not sometimes it does, but it's not always like you go into like this large, lengthy kind of like explication of like this particular mechanic or this particular law of supply and demand, how that affects everything. Yeah, it is still after all a very great and a very heartwarming and a little tragic of a story,
Mm-hmm.
set in the midst of all of this, right? And it is
Yeah.
incredibly enjoyable because it manages to do that, and it's not just an economics lecture in anime form.
Like, to your point, when the characters are not spouting economic exposition,
Yeah.
it is some of the best written banter that I've seen in anime.
Hmm.
The two characters have a very unique, nuanced chemistry. They are both, kind of laid back enough to take out, to take and dish out teasing.
Hmm.
They are sarcastic,
Hmm.
friendly insults, snarky, and they each have a sort of depth to them that I was not initially expecting.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Lawrence, his personality, his slight uneasiness and awkwardness about traveling with a deity, and kind of Hollow's subtle fear of loneliness and rejection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, really good work, and really, really witty and sarcastic banter, well written dialogue and characterizations, frequently broken up by economic exposition, also, which I also found fascinating. Like, some people might not.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, for sure. It's not for everybody, but like come for the story, right? Come for the story, stay for the character development and learn some economics on the way, right? Like that's just kind of my stance on Spice and Wolf.
I've said a lot of times on various anime reviews that my biggest gripe with anime in general, right? Like, not a particular genre of anime, but with anime,
Yeah.
is that my biggest problem is the over explanation of certain things.
Uh-huh.
Like, whenever there's a twist in let's say a shonen, and then the villain or the hero, where he explains like, oh, how did I do this counter move, and that takes up like 3/4 of the episode. That fucking monologue about, oh, you thought I was gonna do this, but I actually did that. Like, for the first time ever, I actually appreciated it in this show.
Yeah.
The over explanation, because I needed it. Like, always I'm like, don't talk to me like I'm a child, and then
Yeah.
this one is like, yes, I'm a child, I don't understand,
Yeah.
please talk to me like I'm a child.
Yeah. I think for
Yeah.
me there's one particular episode that just kind of turned me on to how brilliant this is, and it's the literal supply and demand lesson, right? Like the market,
Right,
the
right.
one in the market with the auction and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that blew my mind because I've never seen it done so concisely and so simply, right? Like all the hours of my economics like lecturer telling me about, okay, like this is why this exists and this is how, like, to see an actual practical illustration of how those things work in a real setting, as far as the anime can be, as real as the anime can be, right, was
Mhm.
just fascinating to watch. I mean, like some of the twists and turns and kind of the reviews about the different kind of like deceptions that need to go on and all of that. Like there are portions that uh like I think the guild arc especially for me was kind of where it fell off a bit.
Right.
But I pulled through that, despite the fact that I felt it was overcomplicated,
Mm.
because at that point you are so invested in Craft and Hollow's relationship that you need to know what's going to happen to them, right?
Yep.
And the thing is that there was a pretty large gap between season one and season two of Spice
Hmm.
and Wolf, right? And I only watched season two of Spice and Wolf a couple of years ago when one of my colleagues was telling, "Hey, you watched Spice and Wolf or not? Do you know there's a second season?" I said, "No, I didn't know there was a second season."
Hmm.
Yeah, and so that kind of like tied it up for me, where because I was a little upset that I kind of got to the point whereby, you know what, it's over complex, I can close one eye to it just because like, I'm really invested to see what happens to Craft and Hollow,
Yep.
right? And then the season ended and you don't
Mm.
get a completion to the story. So I was very happy to discover season two, which does wrap it up, to the largest degree possible.
Yeah.
And Yeah, like overall, still like this ranks very, very highly on one of my favorite animes of all time, just because of how different it is, and like the parts that it does well, it does really, really well, right? It's not a
Yeah.
perfect anime, and I don't think one actually exists, but like
Mm.
for all that it's meant to do, it does very well.
Oh yeah, agreed, man. Like, I like to categorize my animes into like different things, lah. Like,
Yeah,
what is my favorite like fantasy anime, and I think Mushishi that is it. Like,
yeah, well,
what is my favorite sports anime? It's Haikyuu and Yuri on Ice,
yeah,
and things like that. Uh, being of I think this is by default. It's my favorite anime about economics.
Okay, so as a kind of tangent to that, I kind of
Yeah.
realized I've been rewatching. So in line with this, right? While Hits and I were just kind of talking about Spice and Wolf off air, there is another anime that's also on Netflix right now that has a
Yep.
similar vibe to it. So it's
Yeah. You
called
like
Mao
you like
Yu,
yeah. Yeah.
and that isn't so much about medieval economics as it is more specifically about medieval agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
and it has a very similar vibe to Spice and Wolf. I don't think the story is as tender and as heartwarming as that, right? That one has a bit more fan service. It's a bit more ridiculous on the story side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But man, that is like it's very very similar. So I don't know. Whenever you have time and you do happen to check that out, I would be very curious to hear if you would consider it an economics anime,
Okay.
just because
Yeah.
I mean, there's space for more than one lah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But all in all, yeah, I'm glad. That's okay. So, what is the most interesting thing you have learned from watching Spice and Wolf, economics wise, or just like business savvy wise?
I think the most interesting thing I learned was that I was not as uninterested in economics and business as I was in school, and it
Mm.
makes me very sad because I actually in poly I took this thing called I didn't take mass comm in poly. I took business engineering,
Hmm.
and I focused more on the engineering side
Hmm.
because it was easier for me to understand mechanically lah. And I kind of just dozed off during the business side of things lah,
Yep.
the economics, the things about supply and demand, etc., etc., etc. And what was interesting to me is that when I was watching this, it brought back that I actually did through osmosis, maybe retain a lot of the concepts.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I kind of wish that just pay attention a bit more, and I could have actually like done well. And I wish that they had showed this anime instead of just some PowerPoint lecture lah. That
Yeah.
was what came to me
So,
while watching this.
so if there, I think the chances are pretty slim. But if there's
Hmm.
any economics teachers slash professors slash lecturers who happen to be listening to us for whatever reason at this point in
Yeah,
time in the podcast, please show your students Spice and Wolf.
yeah.
I think it will be a fantastic way to introduce them to some of the concepts
Mhm.
and then have a good story while they're at it.
Nah, definitely, man. It's this Spice and Wolf is available on Netflix. As a nice, curious segue, I was actually thinking while watching this, like
Yep.
we are currently for something I can't announce yet, kind of revamping the schedule. Not revamping lah, like
Uh,
rebooting a bit of our formatting
yeah.
and tweaking our formatting a bit for Behold. From now on, episodes are going to be more themed, similar to our National Day episode. Like
Yep.
when we did our best Singaporean fiction and things like that. So our future episodes are going to be themed around genre or particular type of fiction.
Hmm.
So I wish I kind of had saved Spice and Wolf for like an economics episode.
That would be
Like
fascinating. Okay.
like for example, like if you had seen the Big Short,
Hmm.
the Big Short, basically you are explaining how the recession happened in America.
Yep.
Like all those scenes in the tub where basically characters are just telling you lah, like
Yeah.
explaining to you economic principles, things like that. It just reminded me of the Big Short actually a lot.
Mhm.
And other economic documentaries I've seen. So I kind of wish I had saved this a bit for an economics episode.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, again, hindsight is, oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I was gonna say 2020, but never mind.
But
um,
man, I definitely recommend it.
yeah,
Yeah, yes, there are like some lulls in the narrative, as you pointed out to me, off air. I think the end of season one, it slows down a bit.
yeah,
Maybe it's my fault that I didn't notice because pacing require for you to notice pacing is for you have to watch it
yeah, yeah.
front to back lah, without stopping.
Hmm.
And I stopped a lot lah, so I did not notice spacing issues at
Yeah.
all.
It could be. It also could be like the whole guild arc and the law that I'm talking about had to do a lot with credit, right? Like
Mm,
go into the idea of credit and all of that. And like I understood why they had to go into such detail because like the hook of the entire scheme lied in explaining how it works, right? And where the
yep.
pitfalls of them are. It was just a bit too much. And again, not a perfect anime by any measure, right? But extremely enjoyable in its own really unique way and
Mhm.
quite unlike any other anime that I've ever watched. And I think like that is more than enough merit for it to be recommended for people who enjoy it.
Definitely. the thing about most of my friends who are anime fans, I am frequently recommended the popular animes. Like the popular animes tend to be shonen.
Hmm.
I mean, I have nothing in particular against shonen. I'm just really sick of it.
Yeah.
And the real value that I found in this Behold podcast is your recommendations of animes that are not shonen. Your recommendations of Mushishi, for example, and this one, and your lie in April, different types of animes with different types of flavors have really opened my eyes to the fact that the genre is not monolithic lah.
Hmm.
There, there's a lot of different kinds of enemies. If you like me are sick of shonen, there are many
Yeah.
other types of enemies to
Yeah.
watch.
Yeah. There's a ton of stuff. Like we so often forget that anime is a medium, right?
Yeah,
As much as
not a genre.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
not a genre. It is a medium, and there's just so many, like such a wide variety of things that you could possibly tackle with that. We always joke about how, like, if you can think about, you can think of the most ridiculous situation or the most like niche topic, chances are there's an anime about it,
Hmm.
right? And like it's just part of the reason I just enjoy anime, because like people are free to explore some of the most like nerdy and obscure and niche and esoteric ideas, right? And put them in a way that is digestible and available to just a lot of people, and to appeal to them or to not appeal to them, right?
It's similar to how like I think a lot of cinephiles tend to denigrate television storytelling because the popular forms of television storytelling is like like Chicago Med and Grey's
Mhm.
Anatomy and things like that.
Yep.
Like and like you said like TV is not a genre. TV is a medium
Hmm.
and there are different kinds of storytelling available on TV as they are on anime as well and
Yep.
I'm glad that I've been exposed to like a larger variety of it because I tend to get my anime I don't follow like the websites and stuff, so I
Yeah.
tend to get anime recommendations from fans, and it's always the same thing. Oh, have you seen Hunter x Hunter? Have you seen Demon Slayer? And
All that. Those are really, really good, right? We're not, yeah, bashing
yeah,
the.
not denigrating it at all. Like for me, like when I watch shonen right now, it has to be top notch. It has to be
Yeah.
My Hero Academia level, Hunter x Hunter level, or Demon Slayer level. If not, like it's not. I'm just done with
Yeah,
it.
it's
Like.
not worth your time. Yeah, it is so saturated. Like those particular genres within anime are so saturated that to be on top is really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like a lot of these like precious like hidden gems are hard to find, right? Because they don't get as much money, they don't get as much like advertisement and all that. But every once in a while, like they kind of pop up, And
Hmm.
I'm just hoping for the kind of the next kind of hidden gem to come our way. Yeah. Just
Yeah.
actually just earlier today, I had a friend ask me to recommend like happy, light-hearted anime, which
Okay.
are not as common as you would like to think. And maybe like
Mm.
one day we'll go through that list and
Yeah.
see what I can recommend from there. Yeah, I'm super happy, man, that
Mm.
I felt like it was a bit of a risk recommending this, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad you found it educational.
Mm.
And hopefully, yeah, in future anime recommendations in particular, maybe I'll pick some risky stuff. Maybe we can
Mm.
finally do Steins Gate
Yeah.
for a time traveling like themed episode of Behold.
Uh, yes, yeah, like yeah. Maybe you could do like things like Primer and
Oh yeah,
Dark, like
yeah,
super
yeah.
complex but neat time travel episodes.
And that would be super. Yeah, I would be down with that.
The entire Legends of Tomorrow, shall we say?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we'll get it. Like for a lot of these, like for Dark and for Steins Gate and for like Legends of Tomorrow, we'll end up like trying to break down the nitty gritty like tracking and things like that of how everything makes sense. So we'll see if we can make an interesting episode out of it if we
Definitely,
don't lose
definitely.
people by then. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, and if you're interested, next week we'll be back with a new episode of Genre Equality.
mhm,
We'll be talking about the third installment of Bill and Ted Face the Music.
mhm.
It's a very charming film. We're talking about the new seasons of The Boys. Haikyuu is back on October 2nd, so look out for it.
Yeah.
I'll be espousing my recent love for Haikyuu. I've been behind. I recently caught up, loved it. We're talking about the new Mulan, the controversy surrounding it,
Mhm,
a new Ridley Scott series called Raised by
mhm,
Wolves,
mhm.
and a lot of other fascinating topics. And subsequently on Behold, we'll be talking about shows that have been sequelized or prequelized, movies, iconic
Yeah,
films that have been
iconic films. Mhm.
sequelized or prequelized many years later. In this instance, decades later,
Yep.
in television shows. How some of them do it right, like Fargo. how some of them do it wrong, like Ratchet, and how some of them improbably improves upon the source material in the case of Cobra Kai and the Karate Kid.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's our next topic. I'm actually really excited. I'm a big fan of Cobra Kai.
Yep. Yep.
I was a big fan of Karate Kid as well. It's one of those things I watched as a kid a lot. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is
Seminal.
iconic,
Yeah.
seminal, iconic Jack Nicholson film, and of course Fargo. The Coen brothers they've gone on to do many other things besides Fargo, but Fargo is like their signature film, lah.
Yeah.
And I would like to talk about how Noah Hawley continues to prove that he is a great storyteller. I mean, Legion season 2 aside,
Mm-hmm.
he's doing Fargo great. Like, I think crime drama is his forte,
Yep.
and should stick to it. Fargo season 4 actually debuts next week, and I would highly recommend it. I gotten a chance to preview the first 2 episodes.
Nice.
Chris Rock stars as a mob boss, and that's all I need to say. I've never seen Chris Rock in any sort of dramatic role, and I'm excited for this because he's so serious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is Chris Rock's Uncut Gems.
Oh wow. All right.
Yeah.
All right. We have to see what that's about.
Yeah. Anyways, till next time, this has been Hit Zero.
This is Isa.
Goodbye, guys.
Ciao.